These are the 3 reasons you won't learn Spanish in 2025. If you're new here, my name is Edward. I've been teaching languages for over 10 years. I myself speak 4 languages. But that hasn't always been the case. Up until the time when I was 16, 17, I could only speak my native language, Spanish. So on this channel, I like to show you how I did it, so you can do it as well. So like I said, we're going to be looking at 3 key elements, 3 things that you have to do, that you must do, if you want to make sure that you maximize your chances of actually learning Spanish in 2025. And funnily enough, they're not exclusively language based, or they're not Spanish specific, they're not language only, they can be applied. They can be applied to many other things in life. But generally speaking, and this is what I'm going to be using this year so I can finally improve my Polish, which right now it's like an absolute beginner level, and I wanted to get it to a much higher level. And once I do that, I also want to start learning other languages. I still have a lot on my wish list of learning languages. So these are the same methods I use. These are the same methods I've used and the same methods that I will continue to use to learn languages. So let's get started. Number 1, setting very specific goals. This one is usually very easy when you're in an education system. If you were learning Spanish at school, if you were learning Spanish, you're taking a module at uni, or if you were studying Spanish as part of your high school diploma, you will know that the teachers are going to set goals for the semester. They're going to set specific things that they want you to learn, and they're going to test you on them at the end of the semester, and then you'll know whether or not you learned them. The act of setting very specific goals makes it so we know what we're working towards, and we can plan better how we're going to get there. Because as the expression says, as the saying goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Don't remember who said that, but it's at the top of my head. I've heard it many times. And it's true. It's very true. If you don't set specific goals for your language learning, for anything in general, but specifically for your Spanish, you're not going to, or you're not as likely to achieve much progress, to get any progress out of it, because you don't know where you're headed, and you don't know, and you can't make a clear plan of how you're going to get there. So that's why number 1 is set specific goals. Now, practical advice, because if I just say that, it's like, okay, cool, we knew that. You probably knew that, but let me show you how. I need to go grab something. Hold on. Here it is. Look at this. It's a notepad. Very simple one. Doesn't even have to be fancy or anything. Actually, the simpler the better. The simpler the better. Why? Well, because we're only going to use this once. We're going to use this one time. The goal is to fill it up as much as we can. This is literally just a writing pad. Now, I got a smaller one. I don't want an A4 full size because it means it's less likely that I'm going to carry it with me, that I'm going to take it with me, that I'm going to be using it. If it's this size, it means that this is an A5. You can see it right there. This is an A5 writing pad. It's literally super cheap. And the point of this is that you're going to be using this as your 1 semester notebook. You know, when you were in school, you would have notebooks for the subject, and you will most likely run out of that notebook by the end of that semester, and you will need another one the next one, right? That's why. How does that work? Well, here on the first page, and this is something that, by the way, if you want to, I'm going to be doing I'm calling them semesters. You can call it quarters. You can call them whatever you want. But I like to do 3 months at a time. There's a lot of studies in these. There's a lot of people that talk about it. I particularly learn a lot about setting goals 3 months at a time from Ali Abdaal, who's like obviously, you know, the biggest productivity educator out there on the internet. He's great at what he does, and he has a lot of great advice, which I use for learning languages. So that's why 3 months at a time. Or was that 12 weeks? No. Yeah, that's 12 weeks. 90 days, 12 weeks, 3 months, however you want to call it. This is only for that period of time. That's why it's a small, simple, little writing pad that we can use. If you want to make it prettier because you enjoy making it prettier, you can do that too. I prefer to make it as cheap as possible. And on the first page, you're going to write, and this is what I was trying to say. I'm going to be doing a boot camp, specifically 90 days, for anyone who wants to improve their Spanish. Doesn't matter where you're at. If you're an absolute beginner, if you're an intermediate, if you're advanced already, it doesn't matter. You join the bootcamp, and together with me and anyone else that's going to be learning, we're going to be holding each other accountable. We're going to be using these methods and many more, the ones that I'm talking about in this video, and lots of other methods that I learn about and that I can tell you about. And we're going to do that together. It's on a group. The group is going to be free. So I'm going to put the link to join the group in the description of this video. Go join the group. It's going to be free. And then we're all going to be there for 90 days, starting on the 3rd week of January. So January 20th is when we're going to start. No particular reason for that date. I just want to give people enough time to join, because some people are still, getting over the holiday season and all of that. It's January 6th right now. So January 20th is when we start. Obviously, you can join the group earlier. You can join the group later. If you're watching this video later, you can join the group, because I'm going to be doing it again and again and again. And what are we going to do in that group? Well, the very first thing we're going to do is on page 1, we're going to be writing 3 to 5. I would say probably 5 is enough. 5 very specific things you want to achieve with your Spanish. What does that mean? Okay, let's say that you're an absolute beginner. You're going to write, I want to be able to introduce myself. There you go. Number 2, I want to be able to order at a restaurant or a coffee shop. Restaurant/coffee shop. So we can make those two into one. Number 3, I want to be able to tell a simple story in simple past. There you go, number 3. And so on, number 4, number 5. And we set 5. Not too many. That is a key thing of setting specific goals. Also knowing that you can't overdo it. We only have 90 days to achieve this. And the point is that we're not trying to give up on this. We're not going to be making excuses for these 5 goals. Of course, if something major happens, but we're trying to stick to these 5. So we're not going to fill up the page with 20 things we want to do, because what's the point? It's just very specific 5 achievable, attainable things that we're going to get to in those 90 days. That's a bootcamp, and that's why I recommend setting specific goals, number 1. And there's going to be a lot more that I'm going to tell you of how to use this notebook and everything. So if you want to know the specifics of how to use this little thing and how to use this whole program of 90 days bootcamp, etc., to improve your language, regardless of where you're starting, join the group. Links in the description. Number 2, link your language learning to your hobbies. This is very, very important. And the one thing that always seems to be in people's minds is, how do I learn if I don't live in the country of the language? Right? If you're trying to learn Spanish, but you don't have the opportunity to live in Latin America or in Spain or in Equatorial Guinea, where they speak Spanish as well. If you don't have the opportunity to live in a country surrounded by your target language, by Spanish, well, how do you get fluent in that language? A lot of people think, well, impossible, not doable, right? And if you look at my history of learning languages, and you're like, oh, you speak Chinese? Yeah, I speak Mandarin Chinese. They're like, oh, how come? And I'm like, oh, I lived in China for 7 years. You're like, well, there you go, proof, right? It's impossible. You only speak Mandarin Chinese because you lived in China. Yes, point taken. I learned Mandarin Chinese much more easily because I lived in China. However, I learned English before I ever left my country. And I lived in Costa Rica, where we only speak Spanish. And I started learning at 16, 17. So from the ages of 16 to 18, that's when I learned English. That is to say that, of course, it helps a lot, right? Like in the case of when I went to China. Of course, it helped a lot. But as with the case of when I learned English in Costa Rica, you don't have to live in the country in order to learn the language. A lot of people do it without ever visiting the country. And of course, it's a great opportunity if you have the opportunity, if you have the privilege of being able to travel, and being able to even travel for longer periods to a Spanish-speaking country for you, well, that's great. That will help you a lot. But don't think that if you can't, then your Spanish learning is doomed. It's not. It's really not. And that's what point number 2 is about. Link it to your hobbies. Why? Well, because if you link your Spanish learning to your hobbies, it stops being this ultimate goal and it just becomes a way to get to other things. It becomes, which ultimately is what languages are for, to communicate. Languages are communication tools. Sometimes you're the one communicating, sometimes you're the one receiving the information. If you're reading a book, you're receiving. If you are talking, you're the one emitting the message. If you're watching a video, you're receiving. If you watch a video and then you talk about it to a friend of yours, well, you're doing both. But either way, languages are to communicate, to pass information along. So if you continue to only focus on learning the language as the ultimate goal, and you forget that you're supposed to use it to communicate, whether that be to receive or to emit messages, ideally both, well, you're not going to learn as much, are you? And that is why it becomes so difficult to immerse yourself in the language when you don't live in the country. That's why it's so easy to immerse yourself when you're there. And that's why And that, in saying that, don't think that if you move there, you're automatically going to learn. My first year and a half in China, my first year living in China, it was like I was not learning. I wasn't making much progress. My Chinese was not going anywhere in my first year of living in China. It wasn't good. The progress was so slow because I wasn't putting in the hours. I wasn't understand. There were a lot of things that were not working for me in that first year that I had to learn and I had to unlock. We can talk about that another time. But the point is, there's no guarantees with any of these, immersing yourself. So if it's not guaranteed and it's really difficult and not everyone has the privilege of being able to move to another country to just do that, let's not limit ourselves. We link the language to our hobbies. I always give this example. I love cooking. I love learning about different cultures and their food and how the food represents their culture and who they are as a people, etc. I find that fascinating. And I also love eating and trying new kinds of dishes and new kinds of food. And if you're not even in that country, well, even more so, you need to learn how to cook it so you can prepare for yourself and try it. So I always watch a lot of content related to cooking in the language I'm trying to learn. So if you're trying to learn Spanish, go ahead and watch a lot. There is so much content out there, especially food related, for Spanish speaking countries. All of Spain has so much food culture. All of Latin America, Mexican food, Argentinian food, everywhere. Every Spanish speaking country has a massive food culture that you can learn about. So you can use that. Or if you don't like cooking or you don't love that aspect of it, you can learn about sports, you can learn about science, you can learn about so many things. Whatever it is you like doing, you need to be learning that. You need to be consuming that content, that information in Spanish. And then you need to be using Spanish to convey that information too. Right. If you don't have a friend to practice with, you don't have someone around you who speaks Spanish whom you can practice with, well, just write. It's not the same, but it still helps. So that's point number 2. Link your language learning, link your Spanish learning process to your hobbies, to your existing likes, because it's going to make it easier for you to immerse yourself in the language. Point number 3, measure your progress. If you don't measure your progress, and when I say this, I'm generally not just talking to you, I'm talking to me too. If you don't measure the progress you're making in whatever you're trying to achieve, it's going to be a lot harder to recognize that you're making progress and be kind to yourself and be proud of yourself for the progress you're making. So you're more likely to get down and give up because you're going to feel like you're not making any progress. B is also going to make it a lot harder to figure out what you need to put more hours into, what you need to work on to improve. So if you, and this happens with my students. I get a new student, they come to me, they're like, I need help with my Spanish. I'm stuck. I'm like, okay, what specifically are you struggling with? And often they don't have an answer for that. They don't know. And the reason why they don't know is because they're not measuring it. And then that's when I come in and I help them and I teach them how to measure their Spanish progress, how to measure where they are at and how they're getting better at, specific things and what things they might be struggling with, so we can work on them specifically during the lessons. But if you're not measuring it, well, it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know what you should be proud of, but it's also hard to know what we need to put more work into. How do you measure yourself? Again, join the group for the bootcamp because we'll be talking about all of these things. But a simple thing that you can do. Well, first, we're going to have our notebook, right? We're going to have our notebook where we're going to be able to, by the time you're getting to the end of it, you can look back at the beginning and you can be like, oh, look at that, there's progress. You can also record yourself. And I know a lot of people don't love recordings of themselves. A lot of people don't love listening to their own voice, but you need to work on that. You need to get over that. It's really important. Also, remember, no one's going to listen to it. No one has to listen to it. You don't need to show it to anyone. And you don't even need to record a video like this. If you want to, great. But if you want, and ideally, I recommend just record some audio. If you have a smartphone, you're probably watching this on your phone right now, you're going to be able to record yourself on that smartphone, right? You have a recording app. So just look for it. Hit recording. Get talking. Give yourself a prompt. Give yourself a speaking point. You're going to be asking yourself, okay, what did I do? What did you do this weekend? And then answer that question in Spanish. Give yourself a time limit. You need to speak for at least 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes to answer the question, what did you do over the weekend? And there you go. You start talking. Once you're done, you stop the recording and then you listen to it later. You listen to it the next day, 2 days later. And then you try to spot whatever mistakes you might have made. And you keep doing that as an exercise. You do, let's say, once a week. 3 months down the line, you listen to the first ones from 3 months prior and you'll be impressed by how much progress you've made, but also you will start to, you would have noticed the pattern of, oh, every time I try to use these tense, that's when I get stuck. Every time I try to use this particular word, that's when I have problems. Whenever I'm trying to talk about the past, the present, the future, whenever I'm trying to talk about food, when I'm trying to talk about travel, whatever it might be, you will notice what you need to work on, but you will also notice how much progress you're making, which is going to make you feel happy, which is going to make you feel proud, as you should, because learning a language is not an easy thing to do. And then you're more likely to stay motivated and keep going, which is extremely important. Staying motivated, not giving up, is like the most important thing. So that's it. Those are the 3 things you have to do in 2025 if you want to learn Spanish. If you like this video, you might like one of my other videos. Go ahead and check them out, and please subscribe so you can keep learning more Spanish. Nos vemos.